My name is Brielle Campbell, and I'm 28 years old. As I lay in this hospital bed with tubes snaking from my nose, I never imagined my own sister would try to kill me. The oxygen machine hummed steadily beside me until Cassandra burst through the door, her eyes blazing with fury. "Stop faking, you attention-seeking brat," she screamed, lunging forward and yanking the oxygen tube from my nose. The world tilted as I gasped desperately for air, alarms shrieking throughout the room while nurses rushed in from every direction. Cassandra stood there, chest heaving, as I fought to breathe. "Dad's funeral is tomorrow, and you're still playing victim," she spat before storming out. What my family didn't know was that Dr. Morrison had just received my final test results. Before we dive into this incredible journey of betrayal and justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a story that'll leave you speechless, and make sure to subscribe, because you won't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. Trust me, this gets absolutely wild. 6 months earlier, my world had completely fallen apart when my father, Theodore Campbell, died suddenly at his Denver estate. Dad had built a mining fortune over 30 years, and our family had always lived comfortably in the exclusive Cherry Hills Village neighborhood. The day after his funeral, we gathered in the mahogany-paneled study of his mansion for what should have been a time of mourning and support. Instead, it became the beginning of my nightmare. My stepmother Victoria sat rigidly in Dad's leather chair, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the desk. My sister Cassandra paced near the windows, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors with sharp, angry sounds. My half-brother Grant lounged in the corner, scrolling through his phone with that same indifferent expression he'd worn since childhood. The tension in the room was suffocating as we discussed funeral arrangements and Dad's business affairs. Victoria had taken control immediately, speaking in clipped, authoritative tones about estate matters and funeral logistics. Theodore would have wanted everything handled efficiently, she kept saying, though Dad had always been warm and spontaneous, never efficient. Cassandra nodded along eagerly, clearly hoping to stay in Victoria's good graces. Grant just shrugged whenever anyone asked his opinion, more interested in his social media than our family crisis. Then it happened. Right in the middle of discussing flower arrangements, I felt this crushing weight on my chest. The room started spinning, and I couldn't catch my breath. My lungs felt like they were filling with cement, and panic shot through me as I gasped desperately for air. "I can't breathe," I wheezed, clutching my chest as I slumped forward in my chair. The world went fuzzy around the edges, and I heard someone screaming my name from very far away. The next thing I knew, I was in Denver Presbyterian Hospital with oxygen tubes in my nose and monitors beeping all around me. Dr. Morrison, a kind-faced pulmonologist, explained that I'd suffered some kind of respiratory crisis. "We're running extensive tests," he assured me, "but right now we're treating this as stress-induced breathing problems." The initial diagnosis made sense given everything we'd been through with Dad's death, but something felt wrong. This wasn't just stress. My lungs burned with every breath, and I felt weak in a way I'd never experienced before. Victoria arrived at the hospital within an hour, but instead of comfort, she brought suspicion. She whispered to the nurses just outside my room, and I caught fragments of her conversation. "Very dramatic timing," she murmured to Cassandra. "Theodore always said Brielle was the weak one, always seeking attention." Cassandra nodded vigorously, adding her own poison to the mix. "She's clearly faking to get sympathy before the will reading. You know how manipulative she can be." Grant stood behind them, saying nothing, but nodding along like a mindless puppet. Within days, their whispers had spread throughout our social circle. I started receiving fewer visitors, and the ones who did come looked at me with suspicious eyes. Victoria made sure to mention my convenient timing, to anyone who would listen, painting me as a desperate woman fabricating illness for inheritance money. The family lawyer, Nathan Walsh, even started asking pointed questions about my medical history and mental state during his visits. Dr. Morrison ordered test after test, but the results kept getting delayed. Every day I spent in that hospital bed, Victoria's narrative grew stronger. She hired a private investigator named Russell Kane to document my activities and prove I was faking. Cassandra took photos through my hospital window, claiming I looked perfectly fine when nurses weren't around. Grant started recording our conversations on his phone, though he tried to hide it behind casual family visits. The cruelest part was watching my own family turn against me while I struggled to breathe. Every labored inhale felt like drowning, but they saw performance. Every moment of genuine fear became attention-seeking behavior in their twisted narrative. Victoria cut off my access to the family accounts, claiming I needed to stop the charade before she'd restore my financial support. Within weeks, I was forced to move out of my apartment near downtown Denver into a tiny studio in a rougher neighborhood, surviving on the small savings I had left. The isolation was suffocating. Friends I'd known for years started avoiding my calls after Cassandra's manipulation campaign. She'd spread stories about my history of drama and tendency to exaggerate everything for attention. People I'd trusted completely began questioning every interaction we'd ever had, wondering if I'd been manipulating them all along. Even Dr. Morrison started showing signs of doubt as the family pressure mounted, though he continued treating me professionally. The attacks on my credibility became more sophisticated and vicious as weeks passed. Victoria's private investigator, Russell Kane, started following me everywhere with a telephoto lens camera. He took photos of me during my brief good spells, when I could walk to the corner market without my portable oxygen tank. These images became Victoria's primary evidence that I was clearly faking everything for attention. She printed them in glossy 8 by 10 format and showed them to anyone who would listen, including medical staff, family friends, and even my former co-workers. Cassandra escalated the psychological warfare by organizing what she called intervention meetings with our extended family. She'd invite aunts, uncles, and family friends to her spacious Highlands ranch home, serving wine and hors d'oeuvres while presenting her case against me. Brielle has always been jealous of my relationship with Dad, she'd tell them, dabbing her eyes with tissues. Now she's using this fake illness to try stealing his legacy from the family. She'd show Russell's photographs, pointing out how healthy and normal I looked when I thought no one was watching. Grant's role in the conspiracy was more subtle, but equally devastating. He'd visit me in the hospital, or at my apartment, acting like the concerned brother while secretly recording our conversations. Later, I discovered he'd been editing these recordings, cutting out context and splicing together phrases to make me sound delusional or manipulative. In one particularly damaging recording, he made it seem like I'd admitted to exaggerating symptoms for money. He played these edited conversations for Victoria, Cassandra, and eventually for Nathan Walsh, our family lawyer. The medical community started turning against me as Victoria's influence spread. She'd grown up in Denver's elite circles, and her late husband Theodore's mining fortune had made significant donations to Denver Presbyterian Hospital over the years. She leveraged these connections ruthlessly, hosting charity luncheons where she'd mention my unfortunate mental health struggles and tendency toward dramatic episodes. Nurses who had been kind and supportive suddenly became distant and professional. Some even started questioning my pain levels and requesting psychiatric evaluations. Dr. Morrison faced increasing pressure from hospital administration to declare me mentally unstable rather than continuing expensive diagnostic testing. Victoria made sure everyone knew about the financial burden my fake illness was creating. Poor Dr. Morrison is being taken advantage of, she'd sigh during her volunteer shifts at the hospital gift shop. Brielle has him convinced she's dying when she's obviously perfectly healthy. The constant undermining of his professional judgment put Dr. Morrison in an impossible position. My childhood friends began abandoning me one by one as Cassandra's poison spread through our social network. Jennifer Martinez, who'd been my best friend since high school, called to say she needed space to process everything. Lisa Thompson, my college roommate, stopped returning my texts after Cassandra showed her Russell's photographs. Even my former co-workers at the marketing firm started treating me like a pariah when Victoria spread rumors about my history of workplace drama and tendency to fabricate crises for attention. The financial pressure became crushing as Victoria maintained control over Dad's estate. She claimed that releasing funds to someone in my condition would be fiscally irresponsible and potentially enabling destructive behavior. I was forced to sell my car to pay medical bills and rent. My credit cards maxed out from hospital copays and prescription costs. I applied for jobs, but kept having respiratory episodes during interviews, which made potential employers nervous about hiring someone with health issues. Cassandra organized what she called family meetings at the mansion, excluding me but discussing my situation with extended relatives and family friends. She'd serve elaborate dinners while presenting her evidence against me, turning these gatherings into prosecution presentations. Relatives, who had always been kind to me, started sending concerned messages about getting proper psychiatric help, instead of wasting money on unnecessary medical procedures. Grant began spreading rumors about my mental health history, claiming I'd had episodes during college and high school that the family had covered up out of love. These were complete fabrications, but he told them with such conviction that people believed him. He even suggested I'd had eating disorders and depression that had escalated into attention-seeking medical emergencies. His lies were carefully crafted to sound believable and sympathetic, while painting me as fundamentally unstable. Victoria's most devastating move was convincing Nathan Walsh, our family lawyer, that I posed a financial risk to the estate. She presented him with Russell's photographs, Grant's edited recordings, and testimonials from family members about my erratic behavior. Nathan, who had known Dad for 20 years, started questioning whether I was competent to handle inheritance decisions. He began preparing documentation to support potential incompetency proceedings, treating me with the cautious politeness reserved for mentally unstable clients rather than the warmth he'd always shown me. The systematic isolation was working perfectly. Every day brought new evidence of my family's betrayal as former allies distanced themselves from me. I felt like I was drowning not just from my lung condition, but from the suffocating web of lies and manipulation surrounding me. Victoria, Cassandra, and Grant had turned my entire world against me while I struggled just to breathe from one day to the next. 3 months after Dad's death, Victoria orchestrated what she called a family intervention at Denver Presbyterian Hospital. She arrived with an entourage that included Cassandra, Grant, Nathan Walsh, and a man she introduced as Dr. Reynolds, supposedly a psychiatrist specializing in attention-seeking disorders. The meeting was scheduled during my afternoon treatment session, and they filed into my hospital room like an execution squad, their faces wearing expressions of grim determination mixed with barely concealed satisfaction. Victoria had prepared meticulously for this confrontation. She carried a leather portfolio filled with what she called evidence of Brielle's manufactured illness, containing Russell Kane's surveillance photographs, Grant's edited audio recordings, and written testimonials from family members detailing my history of dramatic behavior. She'd even included medical bills and hospital records, highlighting the excessive costs of my treatment and suggesting that my refusal to accept psychiatric help was costing the family fortune. Dr. Reynolds, who turned out to be a family friend of Victoria's rather than a legitimate psychiatric consultant, conducted what he called an informal evaluation, while I lay connected to oxygen equipment. He asked leading questions designed to make me sound delusional or manipulative. "Do you believe your family is trying to hurt you?" he inquired with practiced concern. "Have you considered that your symptoms might be psychosomatic responses to grief and stress?" When I tried to explain the physical reality of my condition, he nodded with the patronizing sympathy reserved for mental patients. Cassandra presented her evidence with theatrical flair, showing the hospital staff Russell's photographs, and explaining how I miraculously recovered whenever I thought no one was watching. "Look at these pictures," she said, spreading them across my bedside table. "She's walking around perfectly fine, carrying groceries, even smiling at the coffee shop. But the moment family arrives, she's suddenly gasping for breath and needing oxygen." She dabbed her eyes with tissues while describing the emotional toll my performance was taking on the entire family. Grant played his edited recordings on his phone, the audio crackling through the small speaker, as my voice seemed to admit to exaggerating symptoms for financial gain. The recording had been so cleverly manipulated that even I almost believed I'd said those things. Hospital staff members who had been supportive suddenly looked at me with skeptical expressions, questioning everything they'd observed during my treatment. Some nurses who had advocated for me started stepping back, their professional judgment clouded by the evidence being presented. Nathan Walsh presented legal documentation suggesting that my mental instability made me incompetent to make medical or financial decisions. He'd prepared forms to transfer power of attorney to Victoria, claiming it was necessary to protect both my welfare and the family assets. Theodore would have wanted his daughter to receive proper psychiatric care, he argued, not enable this destructive pattern of attention-seeking behavior that's clearly escalating out of control. Dr. Morrison found himself under intense pressure from hospital administration to declare me mentally unstable rather than continuing expensive diagnostic procedures. Victoria made sure everyone understood the financial implications of my fake illness, mentioning Dad's substantial donations to the hospital and implying that continued support depended on responsible medical decision-making. The hospital's chief of staff, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, attended the meeting and asked pointed questions about my psychiatric history and potential for self-harm. The most terrifying moment came when Dr. Reynolds recommended immediate psychiatric hospitalization for what he called factitious disorder with underlying personality dysfunction. He suggested that my elaborate medical performance indicated serious mental illness requiring intensive inpatient treatment. Victoria nodded gravely while Cassandra wiped away crocodile tears, both playing their roles as concerned family members making difficult decisions for my own good. I nearly ended up sectioned under psychiatric hold that day, saved only by Dr. Morrison's stubborn insistence that my physical symptoms were real and required continued medical investigation. He stood firm against the pressure from administration and family, though I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. "I've observed genuine respiratory distress," he argued. "Until we complete the diagnostic process, psychiatric intervention would be premature and potentially dangerous." The confrontation lasted nearly 3 hours, during which my oxygen levels dropped dangerously low from the stress and emotional trauma. Alarms started beeping as my breathing became increasingly labored, but Victoria dismissed it as another performance for attention. Even as nurses adjusted my oxygen flow and checked my vitals, Cassandra rolled her eyes and muttered about my convenient timing and dramatic flair. Victoria's attempt to gain power of attorney over my medical decisions sparked the beginning of a legal battle that would consume the next several weeks. Nathan Walsh filed preliminary paperwork claiming I was incompetent due to mental illness, while I was forced to hire a public defender named James Crawford to fight for my basic right to medical autonomy. The legal fees quickly drained what little savings I had left, and I found myself completely dependent on court-appointed representation. The intervention marked a turning point where my family stopped pretending to care about my welfare and openly declared war on my credibility. They'd presented their case with such conviction and apparent evidence that even medical professionals started questioning my condition. I realized that Victoria, Cassandra, and Grant weren't just trying to discredit me for inheritance purposes. They were systematically destroying my life with surgical precision and ruthless determination. Just when my situation seemed hopeless, an unlikely ally emerged from within the hospital staff. Jennifer Hartley, a veteran nurse who worked the night shift in the pulmonary ward, had been quietly observing the family dynamics during my extended stay. Jennifer was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd seen every kind of medical drama during her 20-year career, and something about my family's behavior didn't sit right with her professional instincts. Jennifer started documenting my genuine medical episodes with meticulous care, noting my oxygen saturation levels, breathing patterns, and physical responses during various times of day and night. She observed that my symptoms were most severe during early morning hours when family members weren't present, contradicting their claims about performing for attention. Her detailed nursing notes recorded multiple instances of respiratory distress, medication responses, and physical symptoms that couldn't be fabricated or controlled voluntarily. "I've been watching you for weeks," Jennifer told me during a quiet night shift, "and there's something seriously wrong with your lung function that has nothing to do with psychology." She showed me her documentation, pointing out patterns in my breathing difficulties and oxygen requirements that followed medical logic rather than emotional triggers. Jennifer had worked with countless psychiatric patients and medical fabricators during her career, and she knew the difference between genuine illness and attention-seeking behavior. Victoria discovered Jennifer's support through her extensive network of hospital connections and immediately launched a campaign to neutralize this threat to her narrative. She approached the hospital's administrative staff with concerns about unprofessional nurse-patient relationships and biased medical documentation that enables patient delusions. Victoria's substantial donations to the hospital gave her significant influence with administration, and she used every bit of leverage to undermine Jennifer's credibility and professional standing. Meanwhile, Cassandra escalated her psychological warfare by claiming I had threatened suicide to manipulate the family into compliance. She fabricated detailed stories about phone conversations where I allegedly said I couldn't live with the shame of being exposed and would end everything rather than face the truth about my lies. These fabricated threats gave Victoria additional ammunition to pursue psychiatric hospitalization and legal control over my decisions. Grant's contribution to this phase of their campaign was perhaps the most disturbing. He produced what appeared to be a suicide note written in my handwriting, claiming he'd found it in my apartment during a welfare check. The note was a masterpiece of manipulation, expressing guilt about lying to everyone and destroying the family with my selfish behavior. Grant had apparently practiced copying my handwriting for weeks, studying old letters and birthday cards to perfect the forgery. The suicide note created immediate crisis protocols at the hospital. Dr. Morrison was required to order psychiatric evaluation and suicide watch procedures, despite his continued belief in my medical condition. Security guards were posted outside my room, and I lost basic privileges like private phone calls and unrestricted visitors. The fake note became powerful evidence supporting Victoria's claims about my mental instability and need for intensive psychiatric intervention. During this chaos, I discovered that Marcus Fleming, Dad's business partner and someone I'd trusted like a second father, had been secretly feeding information to Victoria throughout the entire ordeal. Marcus had been coming to the hospital regularly, presenting himself as a concerned family friend while actually gathering intelligence about my condition, legal strategy, and emotional state. I'd confided in him about my fears and suspicions, never imagining he was reporting everything back to my enemies. Marcus's betrayal cut deeper than my siblings' attacks, because I genuinely believed he cared about me. He'd been Dad's closest friend for 15 years, serving as best man at Dad's wedding to Victoria, and attending every family celebration and milestone. I'd shared my childhood memories with him, sought his advice about college and career decisions, and trusted him with my deepest concerns about the family dynamics after Dad's death. The revelation of Marcus's duplicity came when Jennifer accidentally overheard him on the phone in the hospital parking garage. He was reporting to Victoria about my emotional state and legal vulnerabilities, providing detailed information about my conversations with Dr. Morrison and my public defender James Crawford. Jennifer recorded part of the conversation on her phone, capturing Marcus saying, "She's definitely breaking down under the pressure. Victoria, stick to the plan and she'll crack completely within the week." Jennifer's recording revealed that Marcus had been promising Victoria his support for a massive business merger that would only be possible if I was eliminated from Dad's inheritance. The merger involved consolidating Dad's mining operations with Marcus's transportation company, creating a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My inheritance share would have given me voting rights that could potentially block the merger, making my removal from the equation essential to their business plans. Victoria arranged for Jennifer to be transferred to a different department after discovering her support for me, claiming professional boundary violations and inappropriate involvement in family medical decisions. Jennifer fought the transfer through her union representatives, but hospital administration sided with Victoria due to the family's significant financial contributions and political influence. Jennifer's documentation of my genuine symptoms was dismissed as biased nursing notes influenced by personal feelings rather than objective medical observation. The psychiatric evaluation panel was stacked with professionals who had financial or social connections to Victoria's social circle. Dr. Reynolds returned with 2 colleagues who shared his opinion about factitious disorders and attention-seeking behavior patterns. They conducted their evaluation while I was sedated from respiratory treatments, making it impossible for me to defend myself coherently or present my perspective on the family situation. Grant escalated his evidence tampering by producing doctored video footage that appeared to show me admitting to faking my illness. He'd secretly recorded hours of my phone conversations and used editing software to create a compilation that made it seem like I was confessing to elaborate medical fraud. The video was professionally edited with seamless audio transitions that made the fabricated confessions sound completely authentic and spontaneous. By the end of this phase, I felt completely isolated and overwhelmed by the sophistication of their attack. Victoria, Cassandra, Grant, and Marcus had orchestrated a comprehensive campaign that attacked my credibility from medical, legal, psychological, and personal angles simultaneously. They'd eliminated my only ally within the hospital system and created overwhelming evidence supporting their narrative about my mental instability and fraudulent behavior. The moment that nearly destroyed me completely came on a grey October morning when Dr. Morrison finally received the results from the specialized testing he'd ordered months earlier. I watched through my hospital room window as he opened a thick manila envelope at the nurse's station, his face growing increasingly grave as he read through multiple pages of lab results and diagnostic reports. For a brief moment, hope flickered in my chest as I imagined vindication finally arriving in the form of medical evidence that would prove my illness was real and serious. But Victoria had anticipated this moment with characteristic cunning. She'd positioned herself strategically at the nurse's station under the pretense of delivering flowers to another patient, and the moment Dr. Morrison stepped away to consult with a colleague, she intercepted the test results. I watched in horror through my window as Victoria quickly photographed each page with her phone before sliding the envelope into her purse. When Dr. Morrison returned, the results had vanished, and Victoria was already walking toward the elevator with an expression of cold satisfaction. That afternoon, Cassandra organized what she called an emergency family meeting in the hospital conference room, claiming we needed to make immediate decisions about my deteriorating mental state and increasingly dangerous behavior. She'd invited Nathan Walsh, Dr. Reynolds, the hospital's chief psychiatrist Dr. Amanda Foster, and a court representative named Linda Martinez, who specialized in involuntary commitment procedures. The meeting had an official, legal atmosphere that felt like a tribunal rather than a family discussion. Victoria arrived with a court order she'd obtained that morning, claiming I posed a danger to myself and others based on the fabricated suicide note and Grant's doctored recordings. The order authorized immediate psychiatric hospitalization if medical professionals determined I was mentally incompetent or suicidal. She presented the document with the satisfied air of someone playing a winning chess move, knowing she'd outmaneuvered every possible escape route. Grant's role in this final assault was to provide what appeared to be irrefutable video evidence of my confession to faking illness. He played the doctored footage on a tablet, showing what seemed to be me admitting to elaborate medical fraud while laughing about fooling doctors and family members. The video was so skillfully edited that even I had trouble believing it was fake, and the court representative took detailed notes while watching my apparent confession to criminal fraud. The confrontation escalated when they wheeled me into the conference room still connected to my oxygen equipment, surrounding me with legal documents and psychiatric evaluations, while I struggled to breathe and defend myself. Dr. Foster asked pointed questions about my motivation for maintaining the deception and my plans for ending the fraudulent behavior. Every answer I gave was twisted to support their predetermined conclusion that I was mentally ill and dangerous. The breaking point came when my oxygen levels dropped dangerously during the intense interrogation, causing my breathing to become increasingly labored and desperate. Instead of showing concern, Cassandra interpreted this as the perfect moment to expose what she called my final performance. She stood up dramatically, pointing at my oxygen equipment with theatrical disgust, and declared, "Enough. Stop the performance right now. You've tortured this family long enough with your lies." Cassandra screamed, her face flushed with apparent righteous anger. She lunged toward my wheelchair and yanked the oxygen tube from my nose with violent force, the plastic tubing snapping as she ripped it away. "We all know you're faking everything. Dad is dead, and you're still playing victim for attention." The room erupted in chaos as alarms began blaring and my breathing became increasingly desperate and shallow. Security cameras captured the entire assault, but Victoria had already arranged for the footage to disappear. Hospital Security Chief Robert Kane, Russell's brother, had been receiving substantial payments from Victoria for months in exchange for his cooperation in managing security issues related to my case. The video evidence of Cassandra's attack was immediately classified as confidential medical footage and locked away where my legal team couldn't access it. My oxygen saturation plummeted to dangerous levels as I gasped frantically for air, my vision blurring around the edges while medical alarms shrieked throughout the conference room. Nurses rushed in with emergency equipment, but the damage was already done. Dr. Morrison arrived within minutes to find me in severe respiratory distress, requiring immediate intubation and ICU admission to prevent complete respiratory failure. While medical staff fought to stabilize my breathing and heart rate, Victoria orchestrated the final phase of her public relations campaign. She called local media outlets with a carefully crafted story about my suicide attempt during the family intervention, painting herself, Cassandra, and Grant as grieving relatives trying to help their mentally ill family member. The story appeared on Denver news websites within hours, complete with family photographs and quotes about the tragic situation of untreated mental illness. Cassandra gave interviews to sympathetic reporters, describing the heartbreaking moment when I supposedly tried to hurt myself during the intervention. She cried convincingly while explaining how the family had tried everything to get me proper psychiatric help, but I had refused treatment and continued the dangerous charade that was tearing the family apart. Grant provided supporting testimony about my long history of dramatic episodes and escalating attention-seeking behavior. The media coverage portrayed me as a disturbed woman who had fabricated illness to manipulate her family's inheritance, then attempted suicide when confronted with evidence of the deception. Victoria appeared on local television as the concerned stepmother struggling to help her troubled stepdaughter while protecting the family's other interests. The narrative was so compelling and well orchestrated that public opinion turned against me completely. Emergency resuscitation procedures in the ICU saved my life, but the trauma of nearly dying from oxygen deprivation while my own sister attacked me was almost more than my mind could process. I woke up intubated and sedated, unable to speak or defend myself, while the media circus continued outside my hospital room. Victoria had achieved her goal of making me appear suicidal and incompetent, setting the stage for complete legal control over my medical care and inheritance rights. I regained consciousness 3 days later to find myself intubated and restrained in the ICU, surrounded by machines monitoring every aspect of my failing body. The ventilator breathed for me while my own lungs struggled to function, and through the haze of sedation, I could hear nurses discussing my suicide attempt and psychiatric evaluation schedule. The fabricated story about my trying to hurt myself had become accepted medical fact, recorded in my chart and treatment plan as established history rather than malicious fiction. Victoria wasted no time capitalizing on my apparent attempt at self-harm, filing an emergency petition with Denver County Court to declare me legally incompetent and dangerous to myself. She presented Judge Rebecca Martinez with compelling evidence including Grant's forged suicide note, Russell Kane's surveillance photographs, the doctored video confession, and medical records documenting my pattern of self-destructive behavior. The petition requested immediate guardianship powers over all my medical and financial decisions. Cassandra's media campaign reached new heights of manipulation, as she gave tearful interviews to local news stations about our family's private tragedy. She appeared on Denver's Channel 7 morning show, dabbing her eyes with tissues while explaining how I had snapped during the family intervention and tried to end my life rather than face the truth about my deception. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, combining just the right amount of grief, concern, and reluctant revelation to create maximum sympathy for the family. Grant provided additional media content by sharing what he claimed were childhood home videos, showing my supposed history of attention-seeking behavior. These videos had been cleverly edited to remove context and create the impression that I'd always been unstable and manipulative. He played excerpts for reporters, pointing out moments where I appeared to exaggerate injuries or illnesses for parental attention, building a convincing narrative about lifelong psychological problems. The public response was swift and brutal. Social media posts about my case attracted thousands of comments calling me pathetic, disgusting, and worse. People shared the news stories with angry commentary about inheritance fraud and wasting medical resources that could have helped genuinely sick patients. Victoria's strategy of public humiliation was working perfectly, creating a social environment where defending me became politically and socially impossible. During my second week in the ICU, Jennifer Hartley risked her career by secretly visiting me during a night shift. She'd been transferred to the cardiac unit, but still had access to my floor, and she brought shocking information that changed everything. "I found something you need to see," she whispered, showing me photographs on her phone of medical records that Victoria had been hiding. The images were blurry but legible, showing lab results and diagnostic reports that told a completely different story about my condition. Jennifer had discovered that Victoria had been dating Dr. Harrison Webb, Dad's personal physician, for over a year before Dad's death. Their relationship had been carefully concealed from the family, but Jennifer's investigation revealed romantic text messages, hotel receipts, and photographs of them together at private restaurants throughout downtown Denver. More disturbing, she'd found evidence suggesting that Dr. Webb had falsified Dad's death certificate to hide the real cause of his sudden collapse. "Your father didn't die of a heart attack," Jennifer whispered urgently, glancing toward the door to make sure we weren't overheard. Dr. Webb reported cardiac arrest, but the real autopsy results show something completely different. She showed me copies of toxicology reports that had been buried in hospital archives, revealing that Dad had died from poisoning by a rare industrial compound typically used in mining operations. The poison caused gradual organ failure, particularly affecting lung and heart function. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, as I realized that my own lung condition might be connected to Dad's death. Jennifer had found evidence suggesting that Victoria and Dr. Webb had been slowly administering the same toxin to me through my hospital treatments, disguising deliberate poisoning as legitimate medical care. My progressive breathing difficulties weren't just a mysterious illness. They were the result of a calculated murder attempt designed to eliminate me before the will reading. Jennifer's investigation revealed that Dad had discovered Victoria's affair with Dr. Webb shortly before his death, and had been planning to change his will to exclude her completely. He'd confided his suspicions about Victoria's financial motivations to Marcus Fleming, not realizing that Marcus was already corrupted and feeding information back to Victoria. Dad's decision to revise his estate planning had triggered the murder plot that claimed his life and nearly claimed mine. The scope of the conspiracy became clear as Jennifer shared more evidence she'd gathered through careful investigation and document photography. Victoria had been systematically poisoning both Dad and me using her access to our medical care, while Dr. Webb provided professional cover by misdiagnosing symptoms and falsifying medical records. The industrial toxin was nearly undetectable in standard medical testing, requiring specialized analysis that Dr. Morrison had finally ordered but Victoria had intercepted. Jennifer showed me Dad's real medical files, which documented months of gradual poisoning disguised as routine checkups and vitamin injections. Dr. Webb had been administering the toxin during regular appointments, while treating the resulting symptoms as natural aging and stress-related health problems. Dad's growing suspicion about his deteriorating health had led him to seek a second medical opinion, triggering Victoria's decision to accelerate the poisoning before he could expose the plot. The evidence Jennifer had gathered included photographs of medical supply orders, financial records showing payments between Victoria and Dr. Webb, and communication records documenting their coordination of the poisoning timeline. She'd risked her career and potentially her life to gather this information, knowing that exposing Victoria's crimes was the only way to save me from the same fate that had killed Dad. "I've been documenting everything for weeks," Jennifer explained, "but I needed proof that even Victoria couldn't suppress or explain away." She'd contacted investigative journalist Diana Torres at the Denver Post, who specialized in medical fraud and corruption cases. Diana was known for her thorough investigations and ability to protect sources while building ironclad cases against powerful figures who thought they were above the law. The revelation that my lung condition resulted from deliberate poisoning rather than mysterious illness changed everything about my situation. Instead of being a mentally unstable woman fabricating medical problems, I was actually a poisoning victim whose genuine symptoms had been systematically dismissed and suppressed. Victoria's campaign to discredit me wasn't just inheritance fraud. It was an elaborate cover-up designed to hide multiple murder attempts, while maintaining her public image as a grieving widow and concerned stepmother. Jennifer's courage in gathering this evidence provided the foundation for everything that would follow, but we both knew that exposing Victoria's crimes would be dangerous for anyone involved. Victoria had already demonstrated her willingness to kill for money and social position, and she had the resources and connections to eliminate threats to her carefully constructed narrative. The next phase would require careful planning and protection for everyone brave enough to speak the truth about what had really happened to the Campbell family. Working with Jennifer Hartley's evidence, I began secretly coordinating with investigative journalist Diana Torres to build an ironclad case against Victoria's conspiracy. Diana was a seasoned reporter in her 50s who'd spent decades exposing corruption among Denver's elite, and she recognized the sophisticated nature of Victoria's operation immediately. "This isn't just murder," Diana explained during our clandestine phone calls. "This is systematic elimination disguised as medical care, with professional cover from multiple institutions. We need overwhelming evidence before we make any moves." Diana's investigation revealed the stunning scope of Victoria's financial motivations and criminal network. Dad's estate was worth over $40 million, including mining operations, real estate investments, and cash holdings that Victoria had been eyeing for years. The merger with Marcus Fleming's transportation company would create a business empire worth over $200 million, but only if I was eliminated as a voting shareholder. My inheritance share would have given me enough influence to block the deal or demand significantly different terms. Jennifer continued gathering evidence from within the hospital system, photographing medical records and documenting the chain of communication between Victoria, Dr. Webb, and hospital administrators. She discovered that Victoria had been making substantial charitable contributions to Denver Presbyterian for months, specifically targeted at departments and personnel involved in my care. These donations weren't gifts. They were bribes designed to ensure cooperation with her narrative about my mental instability. The scope of Victoria's bribery network was breathtaking in its thoroughness and audacity. She'd paid the hospital's chief psychiatrist, Dr. Amanda Foster, to support psychiatric hospitalization recommendations. Security Chief Robert Kane received monthly payments for managing problematic security footage and restricting access to evidence. Even some nursing staff had been receiving performance bonuses for reporting negative observations about my behavior and credibility. Diana's research into Dr. Harrison Webb revealed a disturbing pattern of suspicious patient deaths spanning his entire career. Over 15 years of practice, Dr. Webb had been involved in the care of dozens of wealthy patients who died unexpectedly, often leaving substantial estates to younger spouses or business partners. His medical license had been investigated multiple times, but his connections within Denver's medical establishment had protected him from serious consequences. Marcus Fleming's business records told their own story of financial desperation and criminal opportunity. His transportation company was facing bankruptcy due to poor management and gambling debts, making the merger with Dad's mining operations essential for his financial survival. Diana found evidence of Marcus borrowing against future merger profits, creating massive financial pressure that made eliminating me from the inheritance equation a matter of corporate survival rather than just greed. Jennifer discovered that the industrial toxin used to poison Dad and me was readily available through Marcus's transportation business, which regularly handled hazardous materials for mining operations throughout Colorado. The poison was sophisticated enough to mimic natural illness while being virtually undetectable in routine medical testing. Only specialized toxicology analysis would reveal its presence, explaining why Dr. Morrison's extensive testing had initially failed to identify the cause of my symptoms. Diana's investigation revealed that Victoria's campaign against my credibility had been planned for months before Dad's death. She'd been gathering information about my personal life, medical history, and financial situation since early in her relationship with Dr. Webb. The private investigator Russell Kane had been conducting surveillance on multiple Campbell family members, not just me, suggesting that Victoria had been preparing for various scenarios depending on how Dad's will was structured. The edited recordings Grant had produced were more sophisticated than we initially realized. Diana found evidence that Grant had hired professional audio editing services to create the fabricated confessions, paying thousands of dollars for software and expertise that made the doctored conversations virtually indistinguishable from authentic recordings. His forgery of my suicide note had similarly involved professional handwriting analysis and practice sessions spanning several weeks. Jennifer's continued documentation revealed that Victoria's poisoning campaign had been carefully calibrated to create progressive symptoms that would appear to be stress-related or psychosomatic. The industrial toxin was administered in small doses through various medical procedures, creating a gradual decline that could be attributed to grief, anxiety, or attention-seeking behavior. Dr. Webb's involvement ensured that my symptoms would be misdiagnosed and treated inappropriately, accelerating the poisoning while maintaining medical cover. Diana discovered financial connections between Victoria and several members of the psychiatric evaluation panel who had recommended my involuntary commitment. Dr. Reynolds received consulting fees from a charity foundation that Victoria controlled, while other panel members had benefited from research grants and speaking opportunities arranged through Victoria's social connections. The psychiatric evaluation process had been compromised from the beginning, designed to produce predetermined conclusions rather than objective medical assessment. The evidence-gathering process required extreme secrecy and careful coordination to avoid alerting Victoria to our investigation. Jennifer photographed documents during night shifts when fewer supervisors were present, using her medical access to gather evidence from multiple departments and archives. Diana conducted interviews with former hospital employees who had witnessed suspicious behavior, but had been afraid to speak out due to Victoria's influence and legal resources. We discovered that Dad had been secretly investigating Victoria's background before his death, hiring a private investigator named Sarah Mitchell to look into her financial history and personal relationships. Sarah's files revealed that Victoria had been married twice before, both times to wealthy older men who had died under suspicious circumstances. In each case, Victoria had inherited substantial estates after brief marriages, suggesting a pattern of targeting vulnerable widowers for financial exploitation. Jennifer found evidence that Dr. Morrison had been receiving pressure from hospital administration to declare me mentally incompetent, with his job security threatened if he continued supporting expensive diagnostic procedures. However, she also discovered that Dr. Morrison had secretly ordered the specialized toxicology testing that would prove my poisoning, sending samples to an independent laboratory outside Victoria's sphere of influence. The results would be available within days, providing scientific proof of the murder attempts. Diana's network of investigative contacts included forensic accountants who traced the flow of money between Victoria, Dr. Webb, Marcus Fleming, and various hospital personnel. The financial evidence revealed a conspiracy involving millions of dollars in bribes, forged documents, and fraudulent medical procedures designed to murder Dad and eliminate me from the inheritance. The paper trail was extensive enough to support criminal charges against multiple defendants. As we prepared for the final confrontation, Jennifer gathered additional evidence about Victoria's plans for after my elimination. She'd already begun planning her life as Dad's widow and sole inheritor, including real estate purchases, investment strategies, and social activities that assumed my complete removal from the family picture. Victoria's confidence in her scheme was so complete that she'd made arrangements assuming my death or permanent psychiatric institutionalization was inevitable. The will reading was scheduled for a frigid November morning at Nathan Walsh's law office in downtown Denver, and Victoria arrived early to orchestrate what she expected would be her final victory. She'd brought Dr. Webb as her companion, introducing him publicly as her new boyfriend for the first time, confident that my elimination from the inheritance was assured. Her designer black dress and subtle jewelry conveyed appropriate mourning while suggesting readiness to move forward with her new life as Dad's wealthy widow. Cassandra and Grant flanked Victoria like loyal lieutenants, both dressed formally and wearing expressions of grim satisfaction, as they prepared for what they believed would be my final humiliation. Cassandra carried a leather portfolio filled with additional evidence of my mental instability, including recent photographs Russell Kane had taken of me during my recovery from the ICU stay. Grant brought his tablet loaded with the doctored video confessions, ready to present them as final proof of my fraudulent behavior. Nathan Walsh had prepared the conference room with formal legal documents and ceremonial gravity appropriate for reading the will of a $40 million estate. He'd positioned chairs strategically to separate me from the rest of the family, treating me with the cautious distance reserved for potentially dangerous mental patients. Multiple copies of psychiatric evaluations and competency assessments were stacked on his desk, ready to support Victoria's claim to full estate control. Marcus Fleming arrived with his own legal team, anticipating the immediate merger discussions that would follow my exclusion from the inheritance. His transportation company's bankruptcy had accelerated during the months since Dad's death, making the merger essential for his financial survival. He carried briefcases filled with merger documents and financial projections, confident that eliminating me from the equation would clear the path for his economic salvation. I was wheeled into the conference room still connected to portable oxygen equipment, appearing weak and defeated exactly as Victoria had planned. My public defender James Crawford sat beside me looking overwhelmed by the evidence against my competency, having been given access to only the fabricated materials Victoria's team had provided. The atmosphere in the room felt like a sentencing hearing rather than a will reading, with everyone positioned as prosecutors rather than family members. Victoria's confidence was absolute as Nathan began the formal proceedings, reading preliminary statements about Dad's mental capacity and the legal validity of his final will. She sat regally in her chair, occasionally reaching over to squeeze Dr. Webb's hand while maintaining an expression of appropriate solemnity. Cassandra and Grant exchanged satisfied glances, knowing that years of manipulation and planning were about to pay off in spectacular fashion. The first shock came when Dr. Morrison burst through the conference room doors without warning, carrying a thick manila envelope and wearing an expression of barely controlled fury. "Stop this proceeding immediately," he commanded, his voice cutting through Nathan's formal recitation like a blade. "I have medical evidence that changes everything about this situation and requires immediate legal intervention." His unexpected arrival disrupted Victoria's carefully orchestrated timeline and introduced an element of chaos into her controlled environment. Behind Dr. Morrison came Diana Torres with two Denver police detectives, Detective Michael Rodriguez and Detective Sarah Chen, both carrying official paperwork and recording equipment. Diana's presence sent visible shock waves through Victoria's team, as they recognized the investigative journalist, who'd built a career exposing corruption among Denver's elite families. The detectives wore expressions of professional determination, clearly prepared to make arrests based on the evidence Diana's investigation had uncovered. "Ladies and gentlemen," Detective Rodriguez announced formally, "this gathering is now part of an active criminal investigation involving murder, conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Everyone present is required to remain seated while we execute search warrants and arrest warrants related to the death of Theodore Campbell." The detective's words transformed the will reading into a crime scene, with legal proceedings suspended while law enforcement took control of the situation. Jennifer Hartley entered next, carrying boxes of medical evidence and looking both nervous and determined as she prepared to testify about months of careful documentation. She'd risked her career and personal safety to gather proof of Victoria's crimes, and her arrival represented the moment when all the hidden evidence would finally be exposed to legal scrutiny. Her nursing credentials and detailed documentation would provide the medical foundation for the criminal charges being filed. Dr. Morrison opened his envelope with dramatic flair, revealing the specialized toxicology results that proved both Dad and I had been poisoned with the same industrial compound. Brielle Campbell has been systematically poisoned for over 6 months, he announced, his voice shaking with professional outrage. These test results show lethal levels of industrial toxin in her system, administered through medical procedures by someone with access to her healthcare. This is attempted murder disguised as medical treatment. Victoria's composure cracked for the first time as Dr. Morrison continued his revelation, her face losing color while her hands began trembling. She looked frantically toward Dr. Webb, who was also visibly shaken by the unexpected exposure of their carefully concealed crimes. Cassandra and Grant stared in shock as their months of manipulation crumbled around them, realizing that their elaborate conspiracy was being systematically dismantled by evidence they'd never anticipated. Diana Torres stepped forward with additional evidence, including financial records that traced the flow of bribe money between Victoria and hospital personnel. Victoria Campbell has been operating a sophisticated murder conspiracy involving medical fraud, bribery, and systematic poisoning, Diana announced. We have documented evidence of her relationship with Dr. Harrison Webb, their coordination of poisoning protocols, and their falsification of Theodore Campbell's death certificate to hide his murder. Detective Chen began reading arrest warrants while her partner prepared handcuffs, the formal legal language cutting through the conference room's expensive atmosphere like a sword of justice. Victoria Campbell, you're under arrest for the murder of Theodore Campbell, attempted murder of Brielle Campbell, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and bribery, Detective Chen announced. The words that Victoria had never imagined hearing transformed her from grieving widow to accused murderer in a matter of seconds. Jennifer Hartley presented her nursing documentation to the detectives, showing months of careful observation and evidence gathering that proved Victoria's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Her testimony about discovering the poisoning evidence and Victoria's bribery network provided the foundation for multiple criminal charges against numerous co-conspirators. The medical evidence was so comprehensive that denial or plea bargaining would be virtually impossible. Nathan Walsh's involvement in the conspiracy became apparent as detectives found evidence of his cooperation with Victoria's incompetency proceedings despite knowing about the poisoning investigation. His legal career ended instantly, as he was arrested for conspiracy and obstruction of justice, his reputation destroyed by his participation in Victoria's criminal enterprise. The will reading he'd orchestrated became evidence in multiple felony prosecutions. Security footage that Victoria thought had been destroyed was recovered by police technical specialists, showing Cassandra's assault on my oxygen equipment and the family's conspiracy to cover up evidence. Robert Kane's cooperation with Victoria's cover-up led to his immediate arrest and termination from hospital security. The video evidence provided visual proof of the family's criminal behavior that would be devastating in court proceedings. Marcus Fleming's business records were seized as evidence of his financial motivation for participating in the murder conspiracy, revealing his desperate need for the merger that required my elimination. His transportation company's access to industrial toxins provided the means for the poisoning campaign, making him a central figure in the criminal conspiracy rather than an innocent business partner. As handcuffs were placed on Victoria, Cassandra, Grant, Dr. Webb, and Marcus Fleming, the true scope of their conspiracy became clear to everyone in the room. What had appeared to be a family inheritance dispute was actually an elaborate murder plot involving multiple conspirators, systematic poisoning, medical fraud, and extensive bribery. The will reading became a mass arrest as law enforcement dismantled one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in Denver's recent history. The aftermath of that dramatic, will reading transformed my life in ways I could never have imagined during those dark months when my own family was slowly murdering me. Victoria was immediately arrested and charged with first-degree murder for Dad's death, attempted murder for the poisoning campaign against me, conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of bribery involving hospital personnel. Her bail was set at $5 million, which even her substantial assets couldn't cover due to the freeze on Dad's estate pending criminal investigation. Dr. Harrison Webb faced even more serious charges as investigators discovered his involvement in suspicious deaths spanning his entire medical career. The medical board revoked his license permanently, while federal authorities investigated potential serial killing charges involving wealthy patients across multiple states. His sophisticated knowledge of toxins and access to medical facilities had enabled years of criminal activity that was finally being exposed through Dad's case. Cassandra's assault on my oxygen equipment resulted in charges of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The security footage showing her violent attack, while I gasped for breath, became powerful evidence that demonstrated the family's complete lack of concern for my welfare. Her media interviews claiming I was mentally unstable were now evidence of her participation in the cover-up rather than expressions of family concern. Grant faced charges for evidence tampering, fraud, and conspiracy after investigators proved his audio recordings were professionally fabricated, and his forged suicide note was intended to support my involuntary psychiatric commitment. His technical skills in creating false evidence had been central to Victoria's strategy for eliminating me from the inheritance, making him an essential participant in the criminal conspiracy rather than a passive family member. Marcus Fleming's transportation company was seized by federal authorities as evidence in the poisoning investigation, revealing that his access to industrial toxins had provided the means for both Dad's murder and my attempted murder. His financial desperation and need for the merger had made him willing to participate in multiple murders, destroying both his business empire and his personal reputation in Denver's business community. The investigation expanded to include multiple hospital personnel who had accepted bribes from Victoria to support her narrative about my mental instability. Dr. Amanda Foster lost her medical license for accepting payments to falsify psychiatric evaluations, while Security Chief Robert Kane faced federal charges for destroying evidence and obstruction of justice. The corruption scandal prompted a complete overhaul of Denver Presbyterian Hospital's administration and ethics policies. Jennifer Hartley became a hero within the nursing community for her courage in exposing the medical conspiracy despite personal and professional risks. She was promoted to head nurse with a substantial salary increase and received recognition from nursing organizations nationwide for her dedication to patient advocacy. Her documentation skills and ethical courage had literally saved my life while exposing systematic corruption within the medical system. My medical treatment finally began addressing the actual cause of my condition rather than treating symptoms of deliberate poisoning. Dr. Morrison worked with toxicology specialists to develop a treatment protocol that gradually eliminated the industrial compound from my system while repairing the damage to my lung tissue. The process would take months, but for the first time since Dad's death, I could breathe without mechanical assistance. Diana Torres won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative reporting on the Campbell family murder conspiracy, and her articles became required reading in journalism schools as examples of thorough investigation and ethical reporting. Her willingness to protect sources while building overwhelming evidence had been essential to exposing Victoria's crimes and ensuring justice for Dad and me. The real will reading, conducted after Victoria's arrest, revealed that Dad had indeed been planning to change his estate structure before his murder. He'd left specific instructions about protecting me from Victoria's influence, and his final will established a trust structure that gave me complete control over the family assets, while supporting various charitable causes Dad had cared about throughout his life. With access to Dad's resources, I established the Theodore Campbell Foundation for Rare Disease Research, specifically focusing on toxin-related illnesses and medical advocacy for patients whose symptoms are dismissed or misunderstood. The foundation provided funding for advanced diagnostic testing and supported nurses like Jennifer, who advocated for vulnerable patients against institutional pressure. The healing process involved not just physical recovery, but emotional rebuilding after months of systematic betrayal by people I'd trusted and loved. Therapy helped me process the trauma of being slowly murdered by my own family while being gaslit about my sanity and credibility. Learning to trust my own perceptions again, after such extensive manipulation, required professional support and careful emotional work. I developed new relationships with people who valued honesty and integrity, including some of the medical professionals who had supported me during the darkest period of the conspiracy. Dr. Morrison became not just my physician, but a trusted friend who understood the importance of believing patients even when their symptoms seem impossible or suspicious. The legal proceedings continued for over a year, with Victoria ultimately receiving a life sentence without parole for Dad's murder and her attempted murder of me. Dr. Webb received consecutive life sentences for multiple murders spanning decades of criminal activity. Cassandra and Grant received substantial prison sentences for their roles in the conspiracy, while Marcus Fleming lost everything and faced decades in federal prison. 6 months after the arrests, I was breathing freely without oxygen assistance for the first time since Dad's death. The industrial toxin had been completely eliminated from my system, and my lung function was returning to normal levels. Standing in the garden behind Dad's mansion, which was now legally mine, I felt the Colorado mountain air filling my lungs without pain or struggle. The experience taught me that surviving betrayal and attempted murder by your own family creates a strange form of immunity to other people's emotional manipulation. Having lived through their systematic poisoning and gaslighting, I found that ordinary social drama and workplace politics seemed insignificant by comparison. I'd learned to trust my instincts completely and never again doubt my own perceptions when something felt wrong. I often think about Dad and how he would have felt knowing that his death led to justice not just for him, but for me and potentially other victims of Victoria's previous crimes. His hidden investigation and the evidence he gathered before his murder had been essential to exposing the conspiracy, even though he couldn't live to see Victoria face consequences for her actions. The Foundation's work has helped dozens of families whose loved ones suffered from mysterious illnesses that were actually deliberate poisoning or medical fraud. Our advocacy program trains medical professionals to recognize signs of systematic abuse disguised as healthcare, preventing other families from experiencing what mine went through. Looking back on those terrifying months, when I was slowly dying while my family convinced everyone I was crazy, I realize that the experience taught me something valuable about resilience and survival. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most end up teaching you how strong you really are and showing you what genuine love and support look like by contrast. As I've shared this story with you today, I hope it reminds you to trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even when everyone around you says you're imagining things. My family nearly succeeded in killing me because I initially trusted their love more than my own perceptions. Never again will I let anyone convince me that my reality isn't valid. I'd love to hear from you in the comments about times when you've had to trust yourself against everyone else's opinions. Have you ever felt like people were gaslighting you about your own experiences? How did you find the strength to stand up for your truth? Please share your stories, because they help other people feel less alone in their struggles. If this story touched your heart, or helped you think about your own family relationships differently, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to hear more stories about surviving family betrayal and finding justice in impossible situations. Sometimes the most painful experiences teach us the most valuable lessons about love, trust, and the courage to fight for our own lives. Thank you for listening to my story, and for supporting survivors of family abuse and medical fraud. Remember that healing is possible, justice can prevail, and sometimes the family that tries to destroy you ends up teaching you how to build a better life than you ever imagined possible. Take care of yourselves, and never stop fighting for your truth.